The title of the next session will be, Will the Government Continue to Let the Internet Be Awesome? Examining regulatory threats on many fronts. The session will be a deep dive into tech policy. The panel will feature Max Papps from Google, Sasha Morse from Owl Street, Ashken Arzan from Tech Freedom, and Matthew Finney from Cato. For questions, please tweet your questions to @mfinney, and please help me welcome them to stage.
As you might be able to tell from the program, I'm not Yao. I'm Matthew Feeney, the director of the Cato Institute's Project on Emerging Technologies. Thank you for joining us here. What I thought would be good before diving into the session is to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. They'll do a better job of talking about themselves than I will them. So please, if we just start with Ash down to the right.
Hi, I'm Ashken Kazarian, but he's going to call me Ash. I'm Director of Civil Liberties at Tech Freedom, where we work on protecting civil liberties of Americans and citizens around the world. We work on deregulation and telecom, a lot of free speech issues, and just in general tech policy. Anything in the realm of tech policy is what we do.
I'm Max Pappas. I'm with Google. I've been there for about 2 years, where I'm on the public policy team in Washington, D.C. Started my career at the Cato Institute. I've seen some former colleagues here, and was at Freedom Works for a long time, so I'm glad to see Josh Withrow is here. And for the 4 years before I was at Google, I was Ted Cruz's chief economist. Now at Google, I'm on the public policy team, where I'm sort of at the intersection of public policy and business, which is pretty fun.
Hi, I'm Sasha Moss with the Aristry Institute. We are a center-right organization that focuses on issues around the gamut from tech policy to civil liberties to postal reform. Sometimes, I don't even know why, but we really don't like the USPS. My background is a Google Policy Fellow. I then worked for a Republican member on the House Judiciary Committee as his counsel and helped co-write the recently signed into law Open Government Data Act, which would make all data open and machine readable. So you can thank the hard work of a lot of Republican members in the House for still writing this legislation.
Great. Well, I think I'd like to start by addressing the question posed in the title of the panel. Taking a broad look at technology policy, what do each of you think are the biggest regulatory threats facing the tech sector at the moment?
Well, I can start. I think if we talk about techlash, that reaction to the technology industry in general, we have to understand that it's not, I think there's a sense of urgency and negativity around it, but it's a natural progression for an industry. Tech industry is not a baby anymore, and now the government wants to regulate it and the society wants to regulate it. What's different though for technology is it's an industry that is not just separate in itself. It's not an oil industry, it's not the automobile industry. It's an industry that's both your AI and your privacy. It's both cybersecurity and our military, and at the same time, our economy. So much of the retail happens online now. Because we have those different sections of general relationships in the society covered by technology, when we say techlash, it's actually negative reactions to small things that happen in huge subcategories of it. So let's say there is a privacy breach. Somehow that affects AI companies. Techlash is not one big thing, is I think my main idea. But that's going to be the year of 2019 where we see a lot of attempts to regulate tech, both on the privacy side, both on the free speech side. So there are going to be bills that are going to try to both protect your rights or take away some of them on the civil liberties sides. So that's going to be 2019, and it's going to be a very long year.
Max, do you agree?
Those are some really sound points, and I do. I think there's an old problem of thinking about tech policy as it's this weird little thing over here with these crazy new inventions. But as Ash points out, it's the entirety of the commercial space now. And I think we're really just at the beginning of that, which is part of the reason it's a problem, that these innovations are not just now really starting to transform every other industry out there. The intelligent use of data to make things more efficient and help things run better is finally getting out to agriculture and the industrial sector. And one of the interesting things about that, about being in the United States, is that with most of the most innovative and largest companies being in the United States, they're built within our regulatory model in the US. So I actually think there's a big implications for US competitiveness here, in that it'll be the companies here that benefit first, since this is where they'll be rolled out first. I think there are a lot of interesting changes that will come to the supply chain and manufacturing, with all the stuff that we're on the cusp of, 3D printing and the shortening of the supply chain from order to delivery, stuff being made on demand and being brought to you that day, all have interesting implications for how global trade plays out in the coming years, where manufacturing is centered. And my concern is that the US has created the regulatory environment for these companies to flourish here. It's not necessary that the biggest companies like Google would be in the US, but in the mid-90s, a series of decisions were made in the US that were different from those decisions made in Europe and Asia. And if I were to summarize those as a whole, they were all to keep the government out and let innovators innovate and let trial and error happen and rely on the existing tort system for any harms that might happen. Central to that were a handful of laws. One is the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. Section 230 provides intermediary liability protection that all the platforms that you know about rely on. Basically said, bad people doing bad stuff are responsible for doing bad stuff. The intermediaries in between them and the customers won't be held liable. So you couldn't have this flurry of lawsuits at all the intermediaries. Other countries didn't take that approach, and that really squashed innovation in a lot of other places. Another of the other two I'd say that were key, or maybe three, or four, I'll give you four. Copyright laws in the US and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was a different approach than Asia and Europe. Our tax laws kept pernicious taxes from getting into the internet. And our competition policy, which deals with consumer welfare rather than competition harm, sort of the harm to the competitors from a too innovative product coming on the market. Those are big differences. All five of those are under threat in the US and globally. And these innovations aren't inevitable. They're fantastic for human flourishing, for human freedom, for human prosperity. But if the legal structure isn't right, and that legal structure is one of permissionless innovation, where you let the entrepreneurs innovate rather than seeking permission for anything to prove nothing bad could happen before it comes out. If we don't continue to get that right in the US, or other places in the world don't adopt those sort of ideas and approaches to allow it to happen in other countries, then this innovation just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. That's a big concern. That's sort of the overarching concern I have, is for the future of human flourishing that may not happen due to bad regulation.
Sasha?
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to take it from here. I guess just branching off of Ash and Max's really brilliant comments is something we're suffering from in Congress. So Max and I are both former congressional staffers. We've been around the halls. We understand the mentalities of members of Congress and their staff. So when we talk about these really complex issues like antitrust law, copyright law, speech and debate, or speech law when it comes to Section 230, we understand them because we work in the field. And a lot of folk I see in the audience also work in the field. What's missing in Congress currently is a breadth of expertise on the staff level. So for example, as many of you might know, to work in Congress, a really great way to start is to intern. Sometimes it's an unpaid internship. And then you move through the ranks, and you stay with the member, and you get to know more staff, and next thing you know, several years later, you become like Max, the chief of staff or chief economist. It's a really, really great position to get into. Sometimes it's because you worked really hard at outside think tanks or industry, or you are a technologist, or you understand the topic. Sometimes you just got kind of lucky because you stuck around long enough. And that's a problem we're seeing currently. So when we talk about these really complex issues in Congress, what we're missing is actual on-the-ground expertise. And for me, and I would say the Austrians too, we're terrified of regulatory threats to the tech industry, full stop. We think Section 230 is important. It should not be torn away. We agree with the copyright protection, specifically the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Section 512, or if y'all use YouTube, the nose and takedown regime, that's based on Section 512. We all understand that. What we want to see more is really skilled individuals in Congress who understand these issues to work with their members and say, I understand the television saying one thing. I understand the newspaper saying another thing. I understand the Twitter sphere has a lot to say. But let's sit, let's look at the law, let's read it together, let's read some academic articles from brilliant folk like yourselves in the room. Let's read the critiques and let's understand it before we jump the gun and write legislation that maybe we really don't need, and oftentimes we don't need. And it's just because it's the fear and the misunderstanding of how technology is used and applied in everybody's daily lives. And I'll quickly conclude with something I mentioned. I was at CES last week, which was really, really cool, and I got to speak, and it was an awesome opportunity. And what I noted regarding this quote-unquote techlash that Ash had mentioned is that it's misunderstanding the tech, but also we've stripped the real world people out of talking about technology on the Hill. It's no longer, for example, that I use, my mother. She is super duper excited about autonomous vehicles because she's going blind, and the worst thing to her is to not be mobile. If she can't get from point A to point B any longer, she's gonna go stir crazy, and her daughter here is freaking out about that because I'm gonna get tons of calls being like, I'm bored, Sasha. I don't want those calls. Autonomous vehicles to her signify freedom. They signify mobility that she's going to lose. We don't talk about that in Congress any longer. It's always, here's the black and white law, here's the problems with it, here's how we want to fix it, and we forget about the real people out there who are benefited by these technologies and use them every day. And that's my biggest fear, is that we've stripped the humanity, and this Congress has stripped the humanity from talking about technology in a really colorful, wonderful, and way that helps the future and promotes liberty.
Great. I'll remind everyone, if you have questions, to tweet at me at that Twitter handle. I am happy to ask questions all panel, but it would be good to hear from you guys. There's been mention of Section 230, and I think many people in the audience will be familiar with the ongoing controversy surrounding alleged anti-conservative bias in Silicon Valley and people being removed from platforms. Why is Section 230 so prominent in that discussion, and why is it important? Is this right now?
Okay. Okay, let's start with what Section 230 is. Section 230 is a law that says that platforms, internet platforms like Google or Facebook or any platform, your website that probably has a comment section, at least mine does because I did it on Tumblr. I'm really bad with the tech aspect of tech. So it's on Tumblr, it has a comment section, but Section 230 protects me from people using my comment section and violating the law, because it's not my responsibility. Section 230 was the reason we have free speech online in the form and shape that we have these days. Section 230 is the reason minority voices online get amplified, because platforms are able to kind of sustain that neutrality in themselves, while also they have a right not to be neutral, because they are private companies and they can censor however they want. If you want to have a social network that allows to post only photos of dogs, because let's face it, dogs are better, that's a right granted by United States laws. So that's Section 230, right? Now, the other part of it is, in the last year or so, there have been conversations about bias of tech companies against the current government, the current Republican majority government, right? Both executive branch and the Senate, well, currently, and last year when they had the House, also against the House. And the claim is that Silicon Valley companies are run by people with liberal opinions, and that they structure their system and filter the content in a way that's more favorable to the groups on the left. Now, that claim is completely untrue. There has not been one single piece of evidence found to this day that there is any bias. None. And it's been 2 years that President Trump has been tweeting in caps lock about this. So now, even if there was bias, it's still okay because we have the First Amendment and it allows companies to filter the content however they want. Remember me talking about dogs? Well, that can be any opinion about pro-choice or pro-life, or anti-gun, or what do you call it, gun control, or pro-Second Amendment. That's all opinions that platforms can moderate. Now, platforms to do that, they have rules and long manuals and guidelines on how to filter the content so no one gets special preference. That's a moral obligation social platforms took on themselves. They don't have to. And sometimes when they mess up, that gets really intense, and that's a conversation we should have, and they alter their guidelines, but it's still a process that's completely A, legal, B, good for free speech. Other countries, so I'm from Russia, don't have Section 230, which gives them a power to suspend and suppress any speech that's against the government. Turkey, they suppress opposition speech all the time because they don't have this protection, even though they claim to be part of the European Union. So Section 230 is an extremely important law that not only helps us with free speech, as I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, but also the economy and every single aspect of the economy that platforms participate in.
That's a nice summary there. Anything to add, Max or Sasha?
I would just like to add that the way this law works is a really great signifier of citizens or constituents or individuals taking the power into their own hands when they run websites or when they comment. And when we do carve-outs of Section 230 and say this speech is bad, you can't use it, it's literally the government coming in and saying, like, Ashna, you can't do something. And it takes the power away from the platform owner, it takes the power away from the user to decide amongst themselves what is free and accessible speech. And, well, trust me, I understand all the controversies going on with bias and websites are being taken down and comment sections are taken down every day. That happens. But again, that is the choice of the owner of the platform and their users. If the owner of the platform sees the majority of their users don't like a comment, more often than not, they'll probably go with the majority of their users and how they view the content. The moment you tell the government comes in and says, well, we're going to do a blanket ban on X speech, why can't we let the platforms and their users decide? Why must we yet again give more power to the government to decide what is and what can and what cannot be talked about? And it's just a public forum. And that's where I get really, really worried, because every single day we're saying, well, we shouldn't talk about X issue, so we're going to blanket ban it. We're going to do a carve out to Section 230. And then you start seeing a little few unintended consequences start bubbling to the surface here and there. So where's the line, and who's drawing it, and how can we stop those line drawings and just say, if you would like to speak freely, it's between you and the platform, and that should be the ultimate arbiter of speech.
Ashley, do you want to jump back?
Yes, just a little exception is, when Sasha was talking about public forum, she meant more of like a societal place of people to meet, but when it comes to the legal doctrine of public forum, platforms are not a public forum.
Right. Maxie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I agree with what they had to say, and the way I would suggest the audience remember is the past, because there is a past that can tend to be informative. And I would argue that today, the internet, and through the internet, things like Google and YouTube, have given, there's never been anything better for speech in the history of mankind. There's never been something that gave so many people the opportunity to get their ideas before so many other people at such a low cost as the internet or YouTube. The stat on YouTube is there are 450 hours of YouTube video uploaded every minute. That's staggering. If you took the Google search index, you printed it, it's stacked to the moon and back 12 times. That's enormous. And that's a wonderful thing for humanity. It's a wonderful thing for various viewpoints and dissenting views. I noticed, not surprisingly, Students for Liberty has a website. In the past, the option was getting your news from 3 channels. And what the internet has allowed, and one of the foundational laws of the internet, is the Section 230 protections that the internet platforms get, which protects them from lawsuit, which has enabled them to grow. They've taken away the gatekeepers. The old society 30 years ago, there were 3 gatekeepers at each of the big media networks. And they told you the news, and they told you, literally, that's the way it is. And I don't know if Students for Liberty outlets would have gotten their stuff published in the handful of newspapers or been interviewed regularly on any of those channels. Looking at the history, the answer is probably not. But now, with the gatekeeper removed, what the internet platforms, with the 230 protection has done is, for example, you can have a YouTube channel. We'll host your videos for free. And all the eyeballs in the world can take a look. And the market will determine which ones get the most eyeballs and which ones rise. There's fantastic market signals constantly being given by everything that happens on the internet. And that's an important change.
If it wasn't for YouTube, I would never learn how to do eyeliner.
Well, I don't know how to do
Thank
eyeliner.
you. Thank you,
Yours
YouTube.
looks great.
Thank you.
I would have done mine the same. But actually, the how-to videos are the same. The how-to videos are the most popular videos on YouTube. But it's also a great vector for information. Last point is that a lot of the conversation that we're hearing has tones of the Fairness Doctrine. And so the Fairness Doctrine was a law that was put in place the early part of the last century. This sort of gets to a little bit what Sasha was talking about. Actually, you were talking about too. Ultimately, 230 is a protection from the ability of governments to censor what's out there in a number of different ways. So what the Fairness Doctrine did was the government was giving out licenses, broadcast licensing, and that was the government's carrot. And they told broadcasters, if you're going to present any controversial opinions on any controversial issues, you need to present a balance on either side. Fast forward to the mid-'80s, Ronald Reagan's FCC did an analysis of 50 years of the Fairness Doctrine. It's a great analysis. Actually, Tech Freedom cites it in one of your papers. And it looked at what happened when the Fairness Doctrine was in place. Was it the case that controversial ideas on either side were getting equal access? What happened in practice was, with the government saying, we're going to revoke your license if you don't do this, it became too dangerous for the broadcasters to present balance on either side, and so they only presented the middle. And contrarian views on either side were squelched. That's a large part on why TV and TV discussion was so bland for so many years. Because ultimately you get down to, even if the assertions that you're bringing up are true, what's the answer? There's 2 options. One option is rely on market pressures and competition. And on the internet, there are no barriers. Competition's a click away. It's really easy to get to another competitor. That's why the tech companies are the biggest investors in R&D, because we know that competition is there. And we've seen the other big dominant companies go down. The alternative is giving the power to a government bureaucrat to decide what's fair and what's balanced. And there's no history of that working out well for anything but the most middle of the road viewpoints.
Thank you all for sending your questions, and I'm going to try and see if I can get Brian, Grace, and David's questions into one question. People are asking about what to do about the seeming lack of expertise on the Hill among legislators when it comes to technology. Some of you might have seen hearings where senators embarrassing themselves talking to CEOs of some of the best-known tech companies. And this goes back to what Sasha, I think, was mentioning earlier about expertise. What can technologists and policy people do to help inform lawmakers. And actually, a follow-up question, is there evidence that there's much desire on the Hill for technology understanding at all, as opposed to just law and policy?
Sure, should we just jump off?
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, first thing I would tell people, if you're interested in working on the Hill, go work on the Hill. And the easiest way you can do it is by attending conferences like this, networking your tail off, and meeting the right people, which is also kind of counterintuitive. You think if I go on a website with applications or resumes, I submit my resume, I should be able to get the job, like most private sector positions. Government really doesn't work like that. So regarding the appetite to have technology expertise, currently, I think many of you heard of the revival of the Office of Technology Assessment. R Street wrote the kind of first paper about bringing back, there were many papers floating around, but we were the ones that kind of started working with congressional offices and saying there was a assessment office previously in the 90s, 70s to the 90s, it was stripped away due to budget cuts, and since then we've seen CRS, or the Congressional Research Service, take up most of the backbone expertise for congressional members. We would like to have more quote-unquote nerds on the Hill helping out their members. We got a study actually to be conducted over this year, which had the findings out, I'm hoping in May, to say whether or not funds should be appropriated for the quote-unquote revival of the Office of Technology Assessment or something like it. Now, this is not an agency. This is within the first branch, the legislative branch, so it is a congressional arm, which I think that gets lost in the conversation quite often. When we hear pushback, it's like we don't want more bureaucracy. This is first branch, legislative, congressional dollars for Congress itself. So those are the nerds who can act as a support system for members when they have complex technological questions. The second thing is, goodness gracious, thank you for the private sector. There's a program called Tech Congress. And what Tech Congress does is they have an open application process, which you all should check out, and they solicit technologists and nerds and policy nerds like ourselves to go work on the Hill for a one-year fellowship. They interview with congressional offices like any other job, and they get chosen by members. Rand Paul had one last year, Senator Wyden, I believe, has had one. Most of your favorite members actually have been the leaders in employing these fellows. Another thing that you can do is continue the educational expertise you guys have already been doing. So a lot of Hill outreach, a lot of mailers. It's not always about the amount of content going towards, but I'd say the level of content. Is it good content, or are we just putting mailers on the Hill because we want them to see our marquee and call it a day? If you work with legislative staff who may not have the expertise that you're needing, but you make it sound and also write it in a way that they'll understand, like 70-page white papers, I love them, I live for that, but I can tell you as a former staffer, I had no time to read them. You're looking for the 1 to 2 page, really deep dive that they can read, and once you catch the interest of the staffer, they will call you later and ask for more information, guaranteed, and you will become their tech expert. And then for getting them back into the offices, so we've talked about options, the Tech Congress option, the quote-unquote revival, a tech assessment option, the calling your senator and saying, I want to work for them option. Again, you need to put yourselves out there. If you have expertise in tech and you want to work for a member, I don't care if you come from their district or not. I worked for a member who, I had never even been to Texas, and I worked for a Texas congressman. I'm from Florida. But I put myself out there, and I called his office and I said, I really, really want to work for this member. Here's my academic background. Here's a white paper I just wrote. This is an issue that was on music licensing, for example. This would be popping next Congress, guaranteed. We're starting to see this happen. Can you please at least grant me an interview? And lo and behold, I got an interview. I didn't think it was going to happen, but there are members out there who really want to find experts and folk like yourselves, young and hungry and willing to work. And if those members you currently like, I can guarantee you those are the members who would want to employ you. And putting a lot on yourselves as experts and really smart people to go out and find them. But once you do, that's a job that will either launch your career and also make Congress a better and smarter place. And those stupid Facebook hearings hopefully won't happen again, because they'll have folk like you in the audience helping them. It's about just doing it yourself and getting it done. And I can guarantee you there are so many members on the left and the right and the independent party who really, really want to work with you. You just got to go out there and put yourselves out there and do it, and it'll happen.
Ash?
So another thing that is less grim compared to watching the hearings is that agencies that enforce and also pass through regulations on their level, they have experts and they keep hiring more experts when it comes to regulating different subcategories of the tech sector. So now you think about FCC. FTC is hiring more economists like Max, who are way more valuable than lawyers like me. And FCC, the Security Exchange Commission, anyone who touches tech, they usually, in law enforcement, they know that there are consequences if you enforce the law in the wrong way, because the courts will come in. So they definitely go and find smart people who are going to advise them on how this works. Now, this is not always perfect, because there's always room for human error. But if you look at the enforcement and the way technology has been regulated up to this moment, we've actually been doing fine. We have been going after companies and people who have caused harm to consumers, which is the most important thing. And at the same time, we've let the innovation develop. That's because there are people in the agencies who know what they're doing.
We're in the final 10 minutes. I want to make sure that, thank you all for your questions. I want to shift slightly to a different topic that I think will be on people's minds. Max, do you work for a monopoly?
I do not.
Well, glad we cleared that up. So why do you think that big tech companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter are so prone to accusations of monopolistic behavior?
Well, it's interesting. The accusations tend not to say monopolistic behavior, because then they'd have to produce evidence. It's usually an assertion of monopoly, right, and left at that. You clearly understand that more needs to be said in order for there to be something to talk about there. It is interesting because that does come up. I think it's a failure to understand the private sector very well and what's actually happening. First, I would say it's a failure to understand what kind of business Google is. Everybody knows the search engine. This isn't a secret, but we don't make the money on the free searches. We make the money on the ads that run at the top. So we're an ads business. Is the ads market a competitive place? You can ask Madison Avenue that. It's an incredibly competitive place. There are a lot of people in the ads market. I don't know if anybody here has a TV, but ads run on TV. And when you're managing a marketing budget, you've got to decide, where am I going to run my ads? Am I going to run Google ads, which are great, and I encourage everybody to do so. The great thing is you can target them to just the people who are looking for what you're looking for. Or am I going to run them on broadcast TV or cable TV or radio? Am I going to put up a billboard? Am I going to put it in a newspaper? Am I going to put it in a magazine? That list there, since we're an ads market, I think makes pretty clear we are not a monopoly. The other thing is that it's very backwards looking, which government discussion and regulation tends to be. So when you think about Google's dominant position, people will point to search. And they'll say, well, first of all, they'll say you only compete with a handful of smaller search engines. One of the search engines happens to be owned by one of the biggest companies in the world. But that desktop search is the past. And even mobile search is the recent past. There's a big transition from desktop search to mobile search over the last few years. But the future, where the competition is in voice search. And there's Alexa, which is owned by a pretty big company. There's Siri, which is owned by a pretty big company. And there's Google Assistant. If you haven't heard of it, it's wonderful. I highly recommend it. Helps you with all sorts of things. And that's an aggressively competitive market. And all you have to do is look toward R&D spending, because monopolistic behavior is the key for government action. Is somebody abusing their position to harm consumers and harming consumers in doing so? That's the US standard. It's not the European standard. And there's an important difference there. The European standard looks at how are your competitors doing, which is a little odd to me. But if you look at research and development spending, the classic behavior of a monopolist is resting on their laurels, which makes it very strange if these tech companies are monopolists that they're leading the world in research and development spending, which is the case. You don't lead the world in research and development spending when you're resting on your laurels.
Well, I think we are on there's a big timer here, and it's, we're just into the final 4 minutes. So we've spoken about controversies and legislation. I want to ask all three of you in the last couple of minutes, what are you most optimistic about? Is there a particular technology or innovation that really excites you? And as Sasha mentioned, driverless cars, so you're not allowed to pick that one twice. But what's something that really excites you in the near future?
I guess I'll start. YouTube. I love it. I'm not saying it's next on the panel, but fun story. Last night, I got stuck in a YouTube makeup tutorial spiral to about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I thought this is so cool because it's not only a platform for individuals to promote their work or what they're into, but it's also a platform that you can make a little cash off of if you do the right partnerships with outside brands and you monetize yourself properly. It's just so unique and interesting from my point of view because it's the first time that I can really think of in recent history where it's individuals saying, I want to do this thing. And they do it themselves. They put the videos together, they shoot the videos, they edit the videos, they find opportunities outside of YouTube for themselves, and they are able to have a small business of one. That's really, 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 really cool, and I'm just excited to see how YouTube continues to develop and help those young artists and young entrepreneurs do really, really cool things.
So I know we're not allowed to say self-driving cars, so I won't, although I will note, I have 2 kids. And if the self-driving cars are in place by the time they reach middle school age, I'll have a lot more places I could send them, and I wouldn't have to drive them to their or soccer practice. So that being said, the other thing is, I think healthcare. The challenge is that it's an incredibly regulated environment, which scares away venture capitalists. But with the increase in machine learning, the ability, so machine works through the repetition of images. The machines are able to detect health problems at a much smaller visual level than the human eye can. I think there are amazing implications for that are in the works, that are being tested, that I think are going to have a great impact on longevity and human health.
So I would say the Internet of Things, connected fridges, connected cars, connected microwaves. As a type A person, I can't wait for everything to be synced and in place. So that being said, I also wanted to kind of end this by saying that part of the reason our society is so open to hearing the conversations about why the tech is bad is sci-fi. It's because few generations have grown up watching Star Trek or now Black Mirror, all this dystopian content that says machines are coming after you. So we don't believe them, we're scared of them. You know what I'm scared of? You know what I think is creepy? Banks and insurance companies. And all those things that's been around for years. I think they're way creepier and way more evil than the nerds in the Silicon Valley.
I'm going to quickly pop in and say Star Trek is tech positivity and not tech negativity. I'm a Star Trek nerd fan, so sorry, Ashkin.
Well, that might be a debate for elsewhere. I think we've just concluded the first libertarian tech panel that didn't discuss Bitcoin once, so well done that.
Blockchain's going to solve it all, man.
Yep.
Solve it.
It's all going to be on the blockchain, guys, so it's going to work. So that wraps up the panel. You have a break until 5:45. All that remains is for you to join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our participants. We really appreciate you all donating your time to be here. As was stated by the moderator, we have a 15-minute break before we reconvene for our criminal justice panel and Governor Bill Weld. There is popcorn stations out in the foyer, so feel free to dig into that and take that with you for the session. This air wall is actually going to be drawn back. There is a bookstore. Many of the authors of the books are here today, so feel free to pick up one of those books, get it signed, get a picture with the author with the book. We definitely encourage you to do that. And after our all-conference session, we will have a pizza party with drinks, which I hope everyone's looking forward to. Awesome. Thank you.